Hello and welcome back. Today we're going to talk about Chapter 10, Addiction in College Students. Some of our learning outcomes, we're going to define addiction, looking at the signs of addiction and describe the impact of addictions on friends and family. We're going to discuss the addiction process, the physiology, biochemistry of addiction, as well as some of the social impacts. We're going to describe various types of addictions. There are many types of addictions that affect college students, and we're going to evaluate some treatment and recovery options for addicts. So what is addiction? Addiction is a persistent and compulsive dependence on either a behavior or a substance. Sometimes those substances are mood-altering substances. Sometimes those behaviors will also alter your mood. Addiction is defined by having negative consequences. So, what are we looking at here? We're looking at compulsion, loss of control, negative consequences. That's the real key here. Often denial of the addiction and the negative consequences that are occurring, and an inability to stop. Those are the hallmarks of addiction. There are two real main types of addiction. Perhaps the one we most commonly think of is substance addiction. That's dependence on a particular chemical substance, a drug. But there are also process addictions. These are very common, and very common in college students. Things like addiction to gaming, addiction to shopping, addiction to sex, addiction to pornography, addiction to eating, and addiction to gambling. Addiction to gambling is becoming a huge problem. So how does the cycle of addiction work? Typically, there's some internal frustration that leads to a fantasy about a particular behavior or about using a particular drug, obsessing about that behavior or that substance, then use of the substance or that behavior, followed by a loss of control. Typically there's associated with this process some kind of depression or guilt or shame over the behavior, and oftentimes people will cease temporarily the addictive behavior, but over time they return to that particular addictive behavior, and this cycle continues. Addiction affects friends and family. Amongst friends and family, sometimes you find people are enabling addictive behaviors. A person who is enabling an addictive behavior is doing something for the addict that they should be able to do for themselves. The physiology of addiction, let's talk a little bit about that. There are intellectual, emotional, and behavioral functions that impact our biochemistry. And that's how our nerves are talking to one another, our brain is communicating. And with addictive behaviors, there are release of neurochemicals, neurotransmitters that influence particular effects on the brain. And sometimes there are substances that are mood altering or experiences that release chemical compounds that make you feel good. Typically those last for a very short period of time, and then afterwards there's a period, a refractory period, where it's difficult to feel those happiness and enjoyment again before re-experiencing the addictive behavior. That's the withdrawal before re-experiencing the addictive behavior or the addictive substance. So what are some risk factors for addiction? There are environmental risk factors for addiction, access to particular substances or experiences. Sometimes abusive or neglectful environments can lead people to turn to substances to avoid those situations. Sometimes peer pressure can result in addictions. And being in marginalized groups does increase the risk for addiction, and as does being under stress. All of these things can be observed in college students. Now, there are some biological features. Some people respond unexpectedly strongly to various stimuli, either drugs or experiences. Sometimes biological mood disorders, such as depression or anxiety, can lead to addictive behaviors. And there are families that suffer particular addictions. Alcoholism does run in particular families. Psychologically, low self-esteem, poor social networking, being quiet, passive, easily influenced by peers can all result in adoption of certain addictions. And post-traumatic stress is another risk factor for addictions. So let's talk about this social learning theory. This theory proposes that people learn behaviors by watching role models. And sometimes those role models can include addictive behaviors. So when you're observing different behaviors in your schools, friends or family, please be aware of whether those models are positive models or whether those models are in fact negative and perhaps models that might predispose to addiction. Let's talk about the process addictions, addictive behaviors. Addictive behaviors include things like disordered or pathological gambling, which is becoming an increasingly large problem because of the easily accessible online gambling. Compulsive buying disorder, seen, technology addiction. I see this very frequently in students. Many students come to class and cannot put down electronic devices for 1 hour to listen to a lecture. Work addiction. Many people overwork. Exercise addiction. This is a strange one because people often view exercise as healthy, but in extreme, exercise can lead to injury and can have negative consequences and be another form of an addictive behavior. There are compulsive sexual behaviors, and sometimes people who suffer from one addiction will suffer from many different addictions. Let's talk about this. Disordered gambling, compulsive gambling cannot be controlled. It's recognized as a mental disorder by the American Psychiatric Association. 75% of college students gamble, and 10% of those may be problem gamblers. And negative consequences are loss of money, loss of livelihood, and it can take a lot of time. The reasons college students give for gambling is the excitement, the risk, and the chance to make money. Unfortunately, the odds are stacked against you, and numerically speaking, mathematically, it's a certainty that ultimately you will lose money if you gamble. Compulsive buying disorder. Compulsive buying disorder may affect up to about 5 or 6% of adults. Oftentimes this occurs with people suffering from depression, and compulsive buyers can often borrow money and end up losing money or being in debt because of their addictive behavior. Technological addictions. I talked about cell phones, but there is also addictions to social media websites, to gaming, blogging, pornography, cell phones and video gaming. All of these are technological addictions. Please try to put down your technology for at least some period every day. Technological addiction can affect up to 39% of adults. 49% of adults are going online several times a day. This did not used to be the case. This is new. This is a new addiction that we're seeing with the advent of social media and cell phones and so on. Ultimately, technological addiction in extreme can lead to disregard for health, sleep deprivation, depression, not getting enough likes, neglection of family and friends in favor of electronic media, lack of physical activity, and generally low grades at school. Work addiction. Sometimes this can be work. Sometimes this can be studying without cause, without meaning. Sometimes you'll see things like binge working for days at a time, irritability, difficulty concentrating because of exhaustion, a drive for perfectionism. None of us are perfect. Do not strive for perfection. I do not recommend it. Oftentimes this will lead to difficulties with relationships, difficulty relaxing, having fun, because you've always got work on your mind. Ultimately, health problems. Exercise addiction. Yeah, people who exercise compulsively. Some warning signs that your exercise program is out of control. If you keep injuring and re-injuring yourself through lack of proper rest. The human body only gets stronger when it rests, not when it works out. Sometimes over-exercising can lead to restlessness and inability to concentrate through exhaustion. And adhering to very rigid work plans without the capacity to change them up is a red flag for exercise addiction. There are compulsive sexual behaviors, people that are addicted to the physical arousal of sex. Sometimes these people who have sex addiction are not interested in other people per se, but really just interested in sex as a vehicle for their addiction. Okay, so how are we going to recover from addiction? Typically, then, should be an intervention, some process by which an addict is confronted or talked to about the negative consequences of their addiction. This is usually best handled by friends, family members, addiction professionals, spouses perhaps. It's really important here to support the addict and not isolate the addict for the behavior. Treatment of addiction generally begins with reduction or removal of that addictive stimulus, but friends and loved ones need to be prepared for the possibility that the addict will frequently relapse.